Stephane. Welcome to the Game Informer Show, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's interesting to talk to you. We talked to you back on the Thief cover story trip. God, when was that? 2013, maybe?
Look what I have here.
Oh, man, if you're not watching on YouTube, he has the Thief Game Informer. That's awesome. We still have that. We appreciate it.
It was a great cover. I still remember that time. As every game developer, being on your cover is like a big honor, obviously. And back then on Deus Ex Human Revolution, I think we didn't get a cover. It was close, but we didn't get one. So the second project of the studio was obviously Thief. And when we landed that cover, man, that really gave a boost to everyone. And it was a great art piece and a great article. And I truly remember that that really was a great moment for the studio.
Oh, awesome. I'm glad we could help the studio, help morale over there. So you were the general manager of Eidos Montreal from 2006, 2007, all the way through 2013, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that is I guess there's a nice story behind that because previously I was at Ubisoft from 2003 to 2006. And great challenges back then also. It was a little bit smaller studio, even though it was already huge. It was about 400 plus people. And the GM asked me to help them out to grow the company, accelerate growth, as we say, and to put in some project management tools. I was responsible for the project management group. And so that lasted 3 years. It was great. Back then we grew from 7 projects to 21 projects. It was back in the days of Prince of Persia, the trilogy, and the Sands of Time, and the Splinter Cells.
Yeah.
And, it was a great moment. And in November 2006 at the Montreal International Game Summit, which is an annual mini GDC in the Northeast, I spoke to some people from Eidos UK, and they had a suggestion, and they wanted me to really open a new studio from scratch, and to go up to 300 people about. So how can you say no to that? Basically. So in January 2007, I flew to London. And things happened quite rapidly. I think in a meeting that lasted barely 3-4 hours, which is in that circumstance quite short, we negotiated, we came to an agreement, signed on a contract, and come back alone in Montreal in the plane. And I said, "Oh my God, and what did I get myself into?" So their basic objectives. As you know, back then, Eidos was the largest British publisher. Mm-hmm. They had a great success and still is having a great success with Lara Croft being done in Crystal Dynamics on the West Coast, and a Hitman franchise doing great also in Copenhagen, Denmark. But the situation is that those studios don't have the luxury to expand too much. You know, recruitment, cost of development, quite high. So they couldn't add a second project, let's say, to their existing one. So they had a problem, these guys at Eidos. They had great IPs sleeping on the shelves. And the 2 IPs that were clearly identified very early on was Deus Ex and Thief.
And so in that first 4-hour meeting, they bring up those 2 games?
Absolutely. And so the goal was in 3 years to grow into every year about 100 people, to add 1 production track, to grow to eventually a 3-game development studio. But the 2 first projects were clearly identified. The order of the projects weren't back then. And that was also a big, big challenge. So for the first 4 months of 2007, I was very lonely in my basement, working on my laptop, doing some projections on budgets and company values. How can we be different from the other big studios in Montreal? And after 4 months, I was able to hire the first wave of senior management for Eidos Montreal.
And where do you find those people? Are you just going around to different game conventions, or how does it work?
Well, since Montreal has quite a vast and large pool of talent, I mean, in Quebec, the province of Quebec has about, at this time, almost 11,000 people working in the video game industry. Back then, it was maybe 7 or 8. So Montreal already had several studios. They had, obviously, Ubisoft is the one that comes to mind, but there was Electronic Arts, there was, and also Behavior and other smaller studios. And I thought, having worked at Ubisoft, knowing a lot of people, obviously, without provoking something bad between, I had a job, I had a mandate, was to recruit top talent to do these great games. So I recruited my producer, and I knew back then in my mind that if I was able to convince him, he had a great job at Ubisoft working on a great franchise, trying to persuade him to come into this adventure, a startup, very low guarantee, very high risk level.
But some good names behind it, Deus Ex and Thief.
Yeah, when you mention those names, well, suddenly they are really attentive. And so that really caught his attention, David Amfazi, who is now leading the studio at Eidos Montreal. I knew that if I was able to recruit him, that he would possibly come with him with his core team, which was, an added value. Instead of hiring piecemeal for this type of project would have been quite a longer and tougher task. And well, as the history says, he accepted, and he came along with Jeff Dugas, who is the game director of the franchise Deus Ex right now, and Jonathan Jacques Beltête, who is the art director. So these were mainly the 3 first dev guys that accepted the challenge to coming to Eidos Montreal.
How cutthroat is the headhunting in Montreal? When you were the GM at Eidos Montreal, were you constantly worried about Ubisoft coming over or EA coming over? Is it just everyone trading developers back and forth and worrying about it like a baseball trade or something?
Well, I think there were several possibilities for me. Because at Ubisoft, there's very high-profile producers that were totally engaged in their franchises, very good, competent people. If I would have went for one of those established, experienced guys or girls, I would have expected some not feedback, but some resistance, obviously. But back then, again, in 2006, 2007, David and his crew were working on projects that were really interesting, but they weren't now they're superstars. I'll agree. But back then, they were almost there. And they were superstars at Ubisoft. And if I would have attacked or tried to recruit those people, the backlash would have been a little bit more severe. But having those guys, giving them their chance to be superstars, I think they understood what I was trying to do.
Yeah, for sure.
So I had a mandate is to grow a company, and obviously Montreal is very competitive. But you know what? I think it brings the best out of the studios, because if the studios consider themselves, top-notch and not being proactive, well, obviously, if you offer something a little bit special or different to good top talent people, they're going to listen. And I guess now Montreal is since then there was THQ that opened up, obviously closed since. There was Funcom, the Norwegian company that came, and there was obviously Warner Brothers. So I guess it was even more competitive after we opened in 2007. I think in 2009, if I recall correctly, these three last studios that I mentioned, THQ, Funcom, and Warner's, announced their arrival in Montreal within a 9-month period. So that, and every studio, remember, Montreal are talking about hundreds of dev staff, not just a dozen or 50, it's hundreds. So I remember Warner was projecting 400, 500 people, and THQ had very ambitious projects. So I think personally, the hardest part was in 2009, 2010, 2011. But again, I think their timing is everything. When people are working on great console games that last 3, 4, 5 years, once the project is done, not every studio is able to assure that you're going to be working, right after your vacation, your time off. So there's a downtime, and this is normal, and it happens in every studio. As well planned it thinks it is, there's always a small downtime. And during those small periods, people are much more attentive to see if there's openings in other studios.
So it's a lot of inviting out for drinks, going out to the bar, having a couple chats, that type of thing.
Yeah, and I guess Montreal is quite lucky in the sense that I could give dozens of IPs that are worked and developed and created in Montreal. So it's like a mini Hollywood in the 50s or 60s, where people sometimes associate themselves more to the project than the studio, and that's where the mobility comes into play. So people know they don't need to leave Montreal or their local city to work on a great game or a great project, and they understand. Well, I think it was back then, it was a little bit different, but I think now this parallel with the movie industry is reality a bit to a certain point. So I've seen a lot of people in Montreal working for 3 studios in 10 years right after their cycle of projects,
Yeah. And now we have Bethesda open up a studio up in Montreal.
Yes.
Gearbox open up a Montreal studio. Is there
in Quebec City?
Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. Is there a bubble here? I mean, how much talent can it really become like that big of a mecca for all these game developers? Does it need to just keep absorbing from the outside world?
Well, I think people were asking the same question 10 years ago, saying it won't be sustainable. And I think Montreal, for the people that don't really know Montreal, thinks that it's only French speaking, that we're Europeans living in America and all that. Well, it's not just that. There's a great creative industry in Montreal. It starts 20 years ago when a guy invented Softimage, which was a tool that was really great for animation. And back then it was bought by Microsoft and everything. Afterwards, you have the Cirque du Soleil that just, I think, celebrated their 20th or 20th anniversary. Again, it's a new approach to an old industry, reinventing the circus. That's one example. I mean, Autodesk has a huge office in Montreal. A lot of development is done in Montreal. So video games is one part of the ecosystem in Montreal. And I think when someone has an idea for a project where it requires tech and creativity, I think Montreal certainly should come up to mind in the top 3 cities in America.
Yeah, for sure.
And and I guess people can ask that question: is it a sustainable thing? I think so. I mean, the industry never has been as healthy in Quebec, in Montreal. I mean, the games that are coming out, just to give a couple of examples from Ubisoft, I mean, all the Far Cry's really, the franchise really started to grow and to be successful in Montreal. I mean, with the Division and the Watch Dogs, this is for Ubisoft, but Behavior, which is the oldest studio in Quebec, an independent, worked on Fallout 4. I didn't know that. I was playing the game, which I completed, in, I wouldn't say 200 plus hours. Obviously, I'm a big follow, guys. But at the end of the credit, after each game that I finished, I watched the entire credits.
Because you're writing down names for headhunting in the future. I get it.
Yeah, you're maybe right, but I think it's really to salute the people that have worked on it. And at a certain point in the credits, I see that behavior worked on the console game, and I said, "Whoa!" So I called Remy Racine, who was the owner. I said, "God damn, you really kept a good secret, you know?" And I congratulated him, and he confirmed that he also worked on the mobile shelter game.
Oh, interesting.
So, I mean, this is one example. Another example is guys from BioWare. The next Mass Effect is done in Montreal. And Jade Raymond is now heading a new business unit of Electronic Arts Motive in Montreal, having also great projects to work on. And Warner's worked, I mean, obviously on Batman. And so if it was a one-trick pony, I guess the industry would have declined several years ago, and it's not the case. And so Bethesda, even though could seem saturated market for talent, came, and I'm sure they're going to be successful.
Yeah, for sure. So going back to those early days at Eidos Montreal, you talk about having the two projects kind of being the throwback to classic games of the past. Were you kind of banking and really excited about that third project being a new IP then? Was that the angle you were hoping to take things?
Correct. We were super honored to be working on, obviously, those two classic IPs. But the third one, we really wanted to keep the door open because a lot of things could happen, you know, over 2-3 years. And we hope to do a new IP, because we didn't want to be branded as the studio that does great remakes, even though it's quite special. I think we succeeded, but we didn't want to be branded as the studio that cannot create a new IP but are able to relaunch a new IP. So we wanted to keep that third project open.
Gotcha.
And so I think it was with David, my producer, on Deus Ex, to finally choose. I think even the headquarters left us the choice between Deus Ex and Thief. Nobody had a firm position on that. They wanted to see if people that we were able to recruit were more comfortable, I guess, with Thief or Deus Ex, and I guess it came out Deus Ex being the first. But I mean, it was. And now afterwards, do we consider working with Warren Spector? Do we reach out to guys from Looking Glass and all the previous studios working on those? And finally we said, if we do that, we really, with all due respect, I think we had the talent to assume all the creative and design decisions.
So was it kind of a bummer then to realize that the industry just wasn't as, I don't know, open to new IP as maybe you had thought initially? Do you feel like that new IP is dead at this point?
Well, we took some whacks at it, and obviously, I hope that people know that in studios that have multiple project capability, that there's a lot of ongoing projects that are killed. I mean, please do not expect that every game that goes through the concept phase will make it to the end. This is not the reality of a major studio, a game studio. So we had a couple of whacks at it, and I mean, again, it's a question of timing sometimes, because with the launch of a new console generation, it seems to be more favorable to have new IPs. And so sometimes we were ready for the new IP, but the consoles weren't there, and vice versa. So I guess it's a question of risk management.
Right, yeah. Right. Is it heartbreaking to leave that behind? Were you especially passionate about that one? Or is it just heartbreaking to leave all those franchises behind? Or is it a relief? I have no idea.
Well, I think since I'm not there since now 3 years, I cannot speak for the guys and girls that are, or the managers, the deciders of Eidos. But I think it's not left out. It's not a question that it will never happen. I think that door will always be open. if the right circumstances are aligned. I mean, I think there's so much talent in that studio that creating a new IP is very thinkable. It's not something that you should exclude. But this question, I think, would be better asked to David or to the head office.
Yeah, for sure. So if you're planning on having like a 2-track studio from the beginning, then can you just talk about like the Deus Ex project and the Thief project and how they ran
Yeah,
along, why you think Deus Ex broke ahead, and maybe what led to Thief having kind of a more troubled development?
yeah. Um, well, Deus Ex, I think we had the good vision since day one. I think the core team really knew after really replaying, questioning, documenting themselves. I think they really understood what needed to be done because we knew that the community of Deus Ex was, even after a decade after Invisible War, was very active. Everybody read the forums, the blogs, and I mean maybe half of the fanboys wanted to do not Invisible War, but the first Deus Ex with high res.
Sure.
You know, I mean that's a legitimate ask, but that wasn't certainly our vision to do to adopt for the new game. And I mean, and we knew that we needed to manage the community in the best way possible, to be quite honest in our intentions, and to get them involved, get them excited, because we knew that it was part of the success if we had most of the community behind us, and if they understood what we wanted to do, that would certainly help us. So I knew at the start we really did our homeworks. We played the game. We asked ourselves what was successful a decade ago, what can be transferred to the now in the real time. The tech has changed, and what is the strength of the team. So I think we really had a great formula, not formula, but a vision of what we wanted to do. And I think it was, I mean, the conception phase was less than 6 months, which is could have been much longer, especially for a new studio with new staff, with a new tech, with no story. The concept phase could have gone a year easily, but it was so crystal clear and so good. I mean, after, I don't remember, I don't have my timeline in front of me, the schedule, but it was quite short. And people said, "Oh, guys, I think you've hit it."
So the pillars just kind of rang true from the old Deus Ex games, but trying to understand the pillars of Thief, it was a little bit more up for grabs. There was too much debate about what the hell was it that made this so popular.
Yeah. Thief was also a great challenge, as big as a community as Deus Ex, certainly. Um, we, I think it's safe to say that we struggled from the starting point. We asked ourselves a lot of questions. Is the camera first or third person? How much? Again, it's a game a decade old, which was completely revolutionized the stealth game. But here we were in 2009-ish, 8, 9. How is stealth selling? Is it sustainable for sales? What is the right balance between stealth and non-stealth combat, hacking or pickpocketing? Sorry, is it first person, second, third person? That really weighs heavily on the animation deliverables. First person, you only have your hands or whatever, you have much less character animation. If it's a third person, obviously you need to invest a lot. That's what you see first on the screen. We had basic questions that went through some stage gating, meaning at every major phase of a project, there's a whole group that gets around the table. Obviously the guys from the project, but the GMs, I mean the senior managers, senior directors, people from finance, people from marketing, people from PR, whatever.
And these are from Square and Eidos, or just Eidos at this point?
again in 2000. Let me see. So, if I may do a small note.
Please.
So we opened in 2007.
Yeah.
In 2008, 1 year after, there was a big management change within the head office of Eidos, which is still British at this time. In mid 2008, it was decided that we needed a major backer if we wanted to survive. And this is when Square Enix came. Square Enix purchased Eidos in April 2009, if I recall correctly. So there was a lot of changes. So
what was your good reaction to that, by the way? Thinking like, Square's going to be my new boss? What the hell?
There was another major publisher. I think it's public. I know it's public that Warner Brothers had a good percentage of the shares of Eidos. And they even published Batman Arkham Asylum back then when it was done through Rocksteady.
That's right.
Who was a third-party studio for Eidos, right? There's a giant spider web organization, quite complex sometimes.
Yeah.
And so, where was I going to that?
Oh, sorry. So Square, it's the new management and it shook things up.
Yeah. So yes, you asked me if my reaction towards Square Enix when there was another horse in the race. I think each other had their strength and their weaknesses, and I think at the end, personally, I don't want to speak for the head office or whatever. Totally. I think it was a good decision because the vision of Square Enix was to become the first international group that had great success in the East and trying to conquer the West with more Westerner type game by having us on board. So that made a lot of sense. Obviously, the quality of their games, obviously, the games from Square are quite high-level quality, very great craftsmanship, and that made a lot of sense. And I think they were very respectful, very curious to see how we did things. And I remember the first 3 months after the acquisition, we had people from Japan every week for 3 months.
Developers?
Ranging from dev guys, tests, QA guys, finance, HR, marketing. I think there wasn't one department that didn't come to see our studio. And not only our studio in Montreal, but obviously Crystal Dynamics and IO in Denmark. So I guess it's, I think the results, if I read correctly, I think the financial results of Square, the last one in 2000, earlier this year, was very quite positive, which is really glad for them that, it took a little bit more time to generate good revenues. But I think with the new CEO, I think is maybe giving a good chance for Square Enix / Eidos to succeed.
Yeah, shut down the Shinra tech and a little bit more of the money holes and all that fun stuff. So I'm curious, like you talk about this pitch meeting, we're all sitting around the table and whatnot, talking about what Thief can be. Is it what every person imagines it is, where it's people saying, no, let's make it for hardcore gamers, let's make it more tactical, and other people saying, we need awesome trailers, we need action, we need to appeal to the widest possible audience? Is it just that cliche?
You're not very far from the truth. I think it's one of those games, at least they're the early development, that really polarized opinions. There's the purist that wants to very much respect the DNA, and the other side of the table is, will this work in 2000? It was meant to be 2011, 2012-ish. Is it going to work? Is that formula that succeeded 10 years ago going to be good and successful in several years later? So there was a lot of discussion. We went back and forth, tried different things. And I think when we finally got a grasp on the balance between stealth and non-stealth, because at first, I remember the first prototypes, I mean, you faced one or maybe two guards, and if you didn't run like hell away from them, you were dead within 5 seconds, which was not appealing to some people.
Sure.
And I mean, so, but once we got something substantially fun, we had another meeting, major meeting, and I remember it was in, I think in Montreal, because we rotate these meetings. So people moved for almost 3-4 days in each city where it happened. But I remember that the night before our presentation, some dev guys from Thief and the producer comes to me and wanted to show me something, a video that showed the manoir burning. It's a large building that was completely burned or being burned at the present moment, and Garrett needed to escape. And the guys said this is a emulation of what could be seen if we had the technology of the next gen consoles, because that type of visual graphics wasn't possible with the old gen.
And they're just being driven insane by the constraints. Yeah.
And I was blown out. I said, my God, this is no. And the art team of Thief was certainly one of the best I ever saw. They were so talented. The technical director, the art director, Nicolas, really did wonderful things with Thief. And I think still to this day, the artwork of Thief is superior.
Yeah.
But anyways, and the question now was, Stephane, do we show this tomorrow? Should we risk to show this and to provoke a discussion, or should we keep it safe and hide it in the closet?
Well, worst case scenario, wouldn't you just get more development time if they bought on it?
Okay. So the next day we decided, I said, hey guys, I'm so proud of what you've done. And I'm banking on the maturity and the intelligence of the people that will be around the table, that they will understand that this is a fake game footage. Okay. So this is a mock-up. This is not running through the normal engine and tools. So we show it at the end of the project, of the presentation, and people were, as I expected, blown away. And at that time, the next gen consoles were starting to be a little bit more precise in their release window. And people were starting to say this would be a beautiful launch title. I said, okay, I understand your enthusiasm, but do you realize that we are supposed to be shipping in, I don't know, let's say a year away from now on the current gen and PC, which we agreed upon early on? But what you're asking is to extend the delivery, to add 2 new SKUs, the 2 new consoles, PS4 and Xbox One. Those are big decisions, obviously. And I think we underestimated maybe the commercial value of what they just saw graphically. And I mean, people were this, and long story short, it was decided that at that time, Thief was going from a 3 SKU to a 5 SKU.
Jesus.
Which not a lot of games, there's some games, but early on, we were maybe the first one to take that risk. And well, the rest is a little bit history, because when you say to a runner, your goal line is 100 meters, and he's at 85, 90 meters, and he said, oh, guys, sorry, I did a mistake. You need to do another lap, and then your race is finished. And I rarely see any projects that are extended in that way to be successful, but I guess people were convinced that we were able to pull it off, and the production was difficult, as any AAA, by the way, game. It's never a smooth sailing. It's a bumpy road. Is just to know how bumpy it is.
Yeah.
And I think the ticker, obviously, if you wanted to be in the first batch of release games, there's definitely a big stick in the ground where you need to finish. And I think people who took the decision underestimated what needed to be done to have, because the new consoles obviously gave us new opportunities, new technology, better capability of doing things. But to completely fill this potential is not a year's worth of work. It has to be thought out. It has to be from day one. Now we can say, I think it was a decision that I don't know if the deciders would be taking the same decisions. But you know what? That's, again, business. That's reality of every day. And I mean, we got a sub 70 Metacritic. I've completed the game several times, and I personally, I'll speak to my own name, and I think the game wasn't missing that much to be a great game. And people, I think, acknowledge that it's just missing a couple of things that would have really made the difference. That's my opinion.
No, that's fair. What was communication like with Microsoft and Sony back then? Because I'm just remembering now, being on that cover story trip, it was so... There was like this intense pressure, like, don't talk about the next generation. We can talk about it's being designed for high-end PCs. Nothing beyond that. We can't confirm it. We can't talk about it. But what was the communication like from the big two with you guys?
Well, I think any major publisher has a good relationship with the first parties. And I think we were pretty much, and especially Microsoft did a extra effort to be closer to the development family when they were, confirming the specs, and they wanted to see our expectations, what we would have like to have in the future. And I think we were involved, if I'm not mistaken, at least a good 18 months prior to release. Obviously, they don't say it's for holidays. When did it came out? For 14?
I think 2013, wasn't it? I think 2013.
13?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, sorry, you're right. Sorry, 13. Sorry. So they don't say this. Obviously, they say, oh, well, we have the luxury. Maybe it's the year after, or da-da. But I think they really did a good, and Sony also. Sony went out of their way to really survey us. What would you like? What do you think about this? So I think it's normal for the first parties and the major publishers to be talking, exchange to a certain level at least 18 months prior.
It's amazing. You hear stories about, I think it was Randy Pitchford down at Gearbox saying, like, trying to convince Sony that 4 gigs of RAM was not enough for the PS4, and they're like, okay. And I don't know how much of it is just Randy's the best storyteller, and so he pitches it like, I demanded 8 gigs of RAM, and then they did it. But are things that much in flux where it just comes down to suggestions about, like, hey, Sony, make it 8?
Well, I think it was obviously every CTO is even better linked with the first parties. They have unofficial discussions and meetings and all that. That's all fine and good. But I'll always remember during GDC and E3s and all those opportunity of meeting with those people, that they were, maybe in my case, when the meetings I attended, was more interested in the features of how can we better, let's say, I recall one of the twos, they were really looking to attack the boot time. The moment that you press the button of the console, in how many seconds can you actually get in your game? And I remember it was a little bit surprising because it was a major point of discussion, and talking about, is it 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds? Is it really that? It seemed maybe in their survey or their focus groups or whatever, it seemed that the customer really wanted to have a quick access. And obviously, during that time, the second screen, all those beautiful ideas that didn't actually work out properly, I guess. But a lot of ideas came out. How can you take a screenshot? How can you share? The share button on the PS4 was, it was discussed very early on, and how to have this spectating of games, a bit like what was it, On Live?
Yeah.
They had very good features. Obviously, they're unfortunately not there anymore, but they had tried several things that really caught the imagination of the first parties back then.
Interesting. So is it tough to keep a secret when you know all these rumblings and rumors about the next generation of consoles?
If you see the NDAs that you need to sign, I never saw NDAs so massive. And I remember, and the proof in the pudding is when you receive the dev kits, obviously. And when you know that, oh, I heard that Ubisoft got, half a dozen, and you're supposed to be in 3 weeks, obviously you call, you say, what's happening? I'm a second-class citizen here. What's happening? And so, yeah, that's a repeat experience that we have every time there's a new generation console coming.
I imagine.
And the dev kits have to be in a controlled environment, so it cannot be placed upon the desk of a regular dev guy that is in an open space. It has to be in a controlled access area, and it has to be non-visible, and you need to hide out the controllers when they're not used, and the list goes on. So those guys know how to protect secrets.
And so the developers that go in that room, they're not allowed to talk about it with the other developers. And like Sony, Microsoft are coming in to check on it every once in a while.
Yeah, they reserve the right to come unexpectedly to see if the environment is respected. And we had a couple of, obviously the account managers of both first parties are often in Montreal. They have like dozens of studios to visit when they're here. So yeah, they pop in, 15 before 12 for lunch, but they don't announce that. They say, can you just show me where you put our beautiful dev kits? And afterwards I'll pay you lunch.
Nice. So talking about Thief's development, I remember on that trip, Stephane Roy, who's a producer, he talked a lot about the struggle of like motivation, and I got the impression at least that when he came on board, he kind of rebooted things and tried to like focus things down. Can you talk about that struggle just to keep a giant development team focused and enthusiastic for that long of a development? Because I think of like a recent example like Doom 4 or the Doom reboot, where it's also in development for so long and then they turned out an amazing product. Yeah. What's it like to be in the middle of that, of just every day not being sure where this is going?
Those are maybe the one of the toughest periods of any dev studio. It's when you know that you need to close. You need to close the game. You've been at it for several years, and all good things need to end. And I remember that I did a change in producers, and I knew Stephane Roy since Ubisoft, and he had a little bit more of a closer profile producer type. And I think that was absolutely needed. I think in looking back, I think I should have maybe acted a little bit earlier, but it's never an easy decision to remove a producer from a game. But I must say that was one of the most difficult periods at Eidos Montreal for me. Mario, who was the initial producer, really, he was there from day one. And he had went through all this, and finally, when you finally see the light at the end of the tunnel, but still, is he the good guy to bring the train to the end of the tunnel? That's the other question. So I guess as maybe how can I say, a manager needs to know when to set up for success his managers, his people underneath. You need to properly set up for success people that are leading a project. And I think I gave the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes it pays. I can tell you it pays. In my case, I gave the second chance to a lot of people, and it worked out more times than it failed. And but I think the first producer wasn't the correct profile producer to close the game, and that's why we brought in Stéphane D'Astous.
It's got to be so tough to think of, like, I don't know this original producer, but I imagine he's a good guy and just pouring overtime after overtime, I'm sure a lot of weekends into this project, and just like gives so much of a shit about it, than to be like, you're not going to do it. Sorry, buddy. I cannot imagine how devastating that'd be.
Yeah, absolutely. I still recall the day, the actual day that I announced Mario that we needed a change. That I had thought it through as much as possible, and I think for the good or the bad, I needed to take that decision. But fortunately, we were able to transfer Mario to the head office. He came from the UK, came to Montreal especially for that game, and we were fortunate enough to find him a place in Eidos headquarters.
Oh, right on. So you talked about people from Square coming over and visiting your studio. What did you learn about the way they develop games in Japan? The other way.
Eye-opening, I must say.
Shocking?
To a certain point. I mean, it's quite opaque in the sense that it's not public knowledge. They don't leave people just wandering the Square Enix building in the dev rooms, the dev floors. It's very, I would guess, old school. They were very, very interested in the technology, in the tools that we were using, because they were doing some stuff the old-fashioned way that was done maybe 10 years or 15 years ago, but the same way today. And because they were able, their level of craftsmanship is so high, it requires just lots of hours. It's not efficient in a business way, but it looks like crazily nice.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I remember looking at a couple of characters from
is it 13?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. From 13. And I mean, just it's mind-boggling how they are able to manipulate some certain parts of the graphic. But once you know how much time and what type of artist is required to do that, they say, "Oh, that is good for the user, but not good for business." In the sense, if you put your business hat, you say, "This is like doing a car in the same methods of Henry Ford." To a certain point, they're beautiful, they're handcrafted. But nowadays, there's ways to do things differently. I'm not saying necessarily, I don't want to shock the purists that say old school is good and that's the only thing that exists. But they were sometimes, and in tech, they're how can I say this politely? They were a little bit further behind from what I would have thought in their tech.
But okay.
Art and design, I mean, they're shining examples and all that, but the tech, in a general term, is not made to support this as well.
Totally. Yeah, I heard similar thoughts, like Tim Longo, who's the original creative director for the reboot of Tomb Raider, and then he went on to do Halo 5 and stuff. He has a podcast where he plays old games, and he was playing through Final Fantasy IX. And he could just not fathom looking at it. He's like, there's so many handcrafted one-offs, not part of any system, that is just made by hand just for this one specific instance and then thrown away. Just one-off systems and mechanics. And I think it's just that aspect that's mind-boggling to Western developers.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Why is that? Is it just lack of communication? Is it stubbornness from the corporation's part to be like, hey, this is Final Fantasy. We're going to take our time with this?
there's that. I mean, Final Fantasy you don't mess around with at Square Enix, and I think it's a general impression that the Japanese don't really like risk. I think it's embedded in their culture, and I think they prefer to go the long route with something they know
Interesting.
than maybe taking a shorter route with, to their eyes, unproven, tested mechanics that they are used to work with. So they prefer to go the other way, and which I totally respect. I mean, they do great games, but they're made differently.
I think the outsider's perspective on, Western versus Eastern Square is I think people project that there must be a lot of frustration with the Western developers because you look at a game like Final Fantasy XV, which was originally Versus 13, being worked on for 10 years, and then you get so many stories about like, oh, the Western games didn't quite live up to expectations. It feels like they are on different planets. They're on different timetables and levels of crunch and pressure. Is that a fair read on it? Is that inaccurate to have that view?
I think so. I think you're very close to my opinion. I think the time aspect, in project management, you have this three-legged chair: money, time, quality. You need to manage a good balance. And obviously, if I come back to Final Fantasy, one leg that will never budge or be compromised is the quality one. So very often, the two others need to balance it. So it takes more time and more money. And this is how they were able to be successful respecting this type of balance. So we should not be surprised that they are continuing in this vein, while be curious to see how the Westerners are doing things. And I think it's just a question of time where there's going to be a certain, not big change, but I think they understand that they need to do something different to be able to have something sustainably successful and commercially hitting the targets.
Yeah, actually,
because spending 5 years on a dev project is not a synonym of commercial success. Obviously, normally should be beautiful, should be well balanced, should be tweaked, should be bugless, but it's not always the case.
So, how often did you have conversations that were just, "Hey, Square, how about you give Deus Ex the resources and the time and the respect for being a classic franchise like Final Fantasy gets"?
I have a great story now, and thanks for reminding me. It was, I think, 4 months prior to the official announcement of Deus Ex Human Revolution. We had our heads down on the production, dev, everything, and we overlooked what we needed to have as marketing assets, okay, for the launch. So you don't just say, hey guys, we're doing Deus Ex, and here's the logo, and bye-bye. You need to have something really eye candy.
Need some screenshots for magazines.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
We like to see something moving. So I remember now it comes back to me, it was a couple of months right after the acquisition of Square Enix acquiring Eidos. So this was in April, if I recall correctly, 9. So early autumn, this is where we questioned ourselves, we need to have a trailer for Deus Ex. There was the initial trailer, but it was way early. Now we needed to show something really substantial. I call my CEO. I say, I think I have a good idea to have an excuse to have us already collaborate. What do you think if we asked, now the name, I don't remember, Visual Work, the studio who does the cinematics of Square Enix that were responsible for the Final Fantasy, Visual Works.
Yeah,
I think that was the internal studio name. I would like to see if they're maybe interested or curious if they could help us doing a trailer. And my boss says, yeah, why not? Go ahead. do I need an introduction or something? So just say you're the GM and yeah. So call this guy. So I write this guy, and in fact, there was a translator because they needed to translate all the emails and all that. And long story short, Visual Works never worked on anything else than Final Fantasy and the other major IPs, doing unbelievable trailers. They say yes. So I said to myself, great. I mean, this is the first sign of collaboration between both groups. Now we need to come up with a storyline and to structure, because we were not sure if they were totally understanding what we wanted to project with Deus Ex. So we had hired just a month earlier guys from Vancouver that really helped us. I want to give them a little commercial. It's Goldtooth Studios in Vancouver really helped us putting the storyline of this trailer. And we totally had confidence that they understood the DNA of the game and what needed to be shown as the first real trailer. And we knew they didn't have the bandwidth to create the CG trailer. And so now, after the Japanese said yes, I need to say, but by the way, you will need to work with one of our outsourcers who did a great job on the story, and we need you to make it happen. So this wasn't so obvious, because normally Visual Works is the master of what they want to do. Basically, nobody tells them what they need to do. They know what to do. But in this case, ask them to work on a Western project, sci-fi. But by the way, the storyline has been written and we have approved it. But we need you to make it happen. And long story short, you remember the E3 trailer? Now I don't want to get my years mixed up. Is it 10 or 9? It's one of the most beautiful trailers I have personally been implicated with, and it was a great collaboration between Eidos Montreal, Goldtooth in Vancouver, and Visual Works in Tokyo. And there was even an extended version of like 10 or 11, 12 minutes. And we had so much difficulty to cut off some parts of it because it was just beautiful. And I remember at the end, the credits come up like a movie, because we really thought it was a piece of art.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you've seen this trailer. It was very popular, but the extended version is like a mini movie. And we almost, I think, suggested this trailer to be in festivals of animation to win some prizes, because it was just this good.
So it's good.
So that was one example of a collaboration.
I thought you were building towards it being a complete disaster and them being complete prima donnas that don't want to work with this other outsource.
No. One thing you need to know if you want to be successful, you need to know your strengths and weaknesses and your core expertise, and you need to go get the right people to do the right mandate. And in this case, I repeat, Goldtooth, these guys really saved our asses several times. It's I think an ongoing collaboration right now with the studio. They had worked on the Thief trailer. It's not just a one-off. One of my responsibilities at GM was to really create alliances or at least strategic partners, not just for the one quick hit and see you buy. It was it was a very successful partnership.
Oh, nice. Great. So now that you're kind of out of the fray of AAA game development, I mean, do you look back on it and just think, man, what an insane business? Or what are your thoughts? Do you think it's sustainable? Do you think it's the scariest business you've ever been in? What are your thoughts on just AAA game development in general now that you're out of it?
Good question. I mean, prior to the video game industry, I was in the aerospace industry for 8 years. So it was quite a shock, obviously, for me coming into the video game early 2000. Obviously, my initial assumptions was, it's not as serious as aerospace. And I've learned quite rapidly what I really think is unique in the video game industry. It's one of those rare form of art, entertainment, call it what you want, that really brings the best of tech and creative people together. I do not really know if there's another product, service, call it what you want, but as a deliverable, if somebody knows a product that reunites tech and art together, I don't know anything better than a video game, which is the great, I wouldn't say mystery, but the great uniqueness of video games. There's no other tech or industry or art, pure art, that really unites those two elements, which is magic for me. So
So attractive.
Sorry?
So it's attractive. It's an attractive industry, but
it's a challenging for a manager because normally managers have a tech background or a lot less managers have an art or a creative sensibility. But a good manager in a video game, I'm an industrial designer by training. I did my MBA, but my initial degree was industrial design, which is architecture of products. And you need to work a product with a need, but there's creativity and technical elements, obviously. And this really was the only that I know of, the industry that really presents the best challenges for this type of management, because doing a regular repeated product is less challenging, is maybe there's more challenges in control, cost, quality. But when you do a creative technical product, there's not a lot of people that can really handle both.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is quite the uniqueness of video games.
Yeah. And so AAA game development doesn't scare you anymore? So are you thinking about getting back into it at any point?
Well, after Eidos, what I wanted to do was to kick the tires of the mobile game. And I wanted to work for a local owner, meaning not a foreign subsidiary. So I work for French people, for a French corporation, a British corporation, and a Japanese corporation. And I'm very proud about Montreal. I refused a lot of relocation offers that were very appealing because I think Montreal really has something special and I want to make it grow. So I wanted to join a fast-growing, up-and-coming studio that does mobile. And for a year, I worked at Hibernium, who are doing quite well. They had a launch project on the Fire phone of Amazon. Obviously, it hasn't been a successful launch for the phone, but just being asked to I think there were 2 or 3 developers that were asked to do a launch native game on the phone, and they have great clients. If you look at their website, they're doing great. And so that was quite interesting. Now, I think I have done pretty much, as we say in French, once you've done you've marched around the garden and you've seen pretty much everything.
Okay.
I'm now maybe seeking, I would be certainly open to for the right opportunity. And right now I'm doing consulting mandates, which is great. I'm helping out indie companies, trying to advise them and to give them some advice. And that is fun. But I'm always looking for the right situation. I've been talking with maybe more tech groups right now. There's a good startup community in Montreal. There's some even companies coming from San Francisco to Montreal because, the cost of the West Coast is becoming quite a big factor.
It's stupid. Success. Yeah.
And so, I'm really, really proud of and glad to have gone through, the console and some mobile experience. And great experience.
Man, you've seen a lot. You've worked with a Japanese company. You've seen the console transition. I mean, there's so many details in it. That's crazy. But I really, really appreciate your time, Stephane. Thank you so much. You were a pleasure to just immediately get back to me and be like, "Yep, I'm up for talking for a long time." So it's always nice it's nice to catch up with people that we see briefly on a cover story trip years down the road.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Doing a great job. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Game Informer Show. Be sure to tune in next week and we'll have a new episode waiting for you. Bye, everybody.